And we're live, Ron.
We've got a pebble garden here, and this would be very much like in the backyard of a small Japanese home. This would be their whole outdoors or their whole garden area, and it was, at one time was below my garage, and I could look out at it, and then it had to be moved from there and put up here, all these pebbles. And they are water tumbled basalt pebbles from the Lake Superior, and through the years I have gathered those and a pail or so at a time, and to bring them up and into the rounded surfaces. These are from shingle beaches. They are only on sandy beaches up on Lake Superior because the pebbles slide back and forth with the waves, and as a result they flatten and round. If they're on what a cobblestone beach is, they're jagged and kind of rough because they're banging onto one another. Whereas
so they're kind of sanded down.
Yeah, so these are actually sanded into shape, and slowly they sand away. So they're a very interesting pebble for doing that. I've always delighted in walking on the shingle beaches up on Lake Superior, just to hear the clattering of the pebbles when you walk on them. And so now I have my own shingle beach here. But each one of the parts, and this would be probably walled with a fence in Japan, neighbors would be having fences, and this would be their little bit of a garden by doing that. And this, I enjoy the moss around it. You can see the moss banks, and so I really haven't done that. I've decided that I would rather have the view of the moss and the trees around it, but normally this would be enclosed in a tiny backyard. And so each one of the stones and each part of the garden are designated. There's a little bit of a water feature here that would clack with the water going up and down. But if you were in the garden itself here, this stone is called the perfect view stone. If you had a guest, you would probably put a little stool here, and then he would have had a perfect view of the garden from there on it. And of course, each one of the stones again has this stone is called the Pedestal Stone, and you could get a slight illusion of a little bit of height in the garden by standing on it. It's one of the three stones that you could actually stand on or walk on in the garden. These two label stones are also walkable. But this stone in the middle here is called a worshiping stone, and for special religious purposes, they would kneel and worship on this particular stone. And to stand on it would be like standing on an altar in church. So you don't want to stand on. A lot of people think that all these are stepping stones, and you have to kind of watch them for doing that. Some of these evergreens are getting a little bit tired looking. This is procumbens from Japan, and you can see there's some bad parts of it, and so I'm going to have to probably replace that eventually on it.
And that looks like a different kind of juniper in the back there, Ron.
That's the common juniper, which is a native of our.
Do you trim that one?
That one I give it a slight trimming now and then. Yeah.
Do you have to trim procumbens?
No, that does it in itself, and this is a dwarfer form of procumbens also on it. Again, getting back to some of the stones here, this stone is called a statue stone, and it's supposed to represent like somebody standing in the garden in the dusk or the darkness. You can kind of get the illusion of a person standing in the garden. And this stone here is kind of laying down. That's called the laying down Oxen stone, or recumbent Oxen stone, and that's usually joined with the statue stone. And there's a cliff stone back in here with a little bit of a cliff edge, and that also is normally with it. And so each one of the stones, again, do have a particular name to it. And again, some of the vegetation, of course, this arborvitae really needs to be trimmed again. Certain fans have to be cut off. But you can see
You've
how
trimmed it before, Ron.
you can see how the branches are contorted by constant pruning on them. And this tree came from a rock out in Lake Superior, as did the other one over there. And again, you can see the twisting part of it there too. Both of these should be probably about 40 feet tall right now. They were probably over 100 years or maybe 150 years old when they were only about this size, when I brought them out of a crack in the rock there on it. So you can see how they have been dwarfed by constantly working and pruning on them.
So how much would you cut off of each?
All just individual little tiny fans, and you work on the, you would probably cut that one off right there, and this one right here.
And that doesn't hurt the tree at all.
No, it doesn't. And again, through the years, where you get the crookedness in on the branches like this.
You have to add that to it, or select at an angle?
Yeah, you watch the certain ones that go at different angles and then concentrate on those.
And if you didn't do that, it would be like this one back here.
It would be huge. Actually, this would be a full-grown arborvitae tree by now, and it'd probably have a trunk this big around on it. So, and this one came from a stump in the poisoned area up from the copper mines up in the Michigan Peninsula, and it was growing on a stump to keep itself from being poisoned by all of the poisoned soil around it from the copper oxides and so on. And it too, I've been trimming it through the years, and it needs it very badly right now. I'm going to probably cut quite a bit of the top off and start working on some of the lower branches here this late in the fall now, or next winter, one way or the other on
to
it.
keep it a dwarf.
But yeah, but it was growing on a stump, and it was probably already 150 or 200 years old when it was only this high, and so it's grown from that time on it.
And all of these features were down below, down the steps there.
Right, they were down behind the garage there, and I could look out of the window there and see it at that time, and pick up all those individual pebbles and get them all up here. And again, the big rocks, that one we brought up with a toboggan during the winter time from down there, because we knew it was much too large to get any other way up here on it.
And I think most people wouldn't think to put a rock standing up like that. They would just flop it down
right
in a garden, but it really is attractive.
Yeah, this one from the house, it always gives me the appearance of an owl face on it all the time.
Oh,
when you look at it this way, you can kind of see the face of an owl there on it.
Oh, I never noticed that before.
And it doesn't have a beak, but it has that flattened face to it.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, with the ears and so on. Then again, the rocks have lichens growing on them and moss growing on them, and wherever I go in the world, I take and scrape with a back of a comb and scrape that lichen powder, which has spores in it. And then when I come back here, when the rock is wet or the lantern top is wet, I'll take and sprinkle that powder on it. And then it takes 3 years to get one the size of a pinhead. So that's why you don't walk on the big rocks here either on it, just because of the lichens.
You can see the difference in rocks that are acceptable to walk on.
Right.
That are bare.
Yep. Exactly.
And then here's rocks that people haven't trampled on.
Right.
And there's lichens growing on them.
This lantern has quite a number of lichens growing on the top of it. And years ago, I knew I was going to do a Japanese garden, but I had priced a catalog from the stone lanterns from Japan, and they were several $100s a piece. And when it got time to have the lanterns, I wrote about them, and they said that, dear Mr. Weinhold, the Japanese are not working for the wages they once did, and the same lanterns are costing many thousands of dollars a piece. So I ended up, I did buy a couple from the nurseries, and I could see the shape of them and how to make them, and so I made my own molds out of styrofoam when you could get the great big sheets of styrofoam, and I brought black sand or dark colored sand from Lake Superior, so each one is casted with sand from Lake Superior also. You can see the rooftop there is eroding very nicely, and it looks like a darkened rock with the lichens growing on it. And but where it's protected, the mixture of concrete and black sand is not eroding as dark as the rooftop. I wish the whole lantern would wind blast. Maybe in a couple hundred years it will wind blast and look like the top there on it. But you
we'll
can
make a second video then.
Okay. So yeah, right. So anyway, these lanterns are interesting. They came about in kind of a strange way. There was a road in Japan that there were robbers, and they had quite a problem with people being molested on the road. So they made these stone lanterns, and they were little pitchers of grease or oil were burned in those, like our security lights. And then the temple priests saw them, and they thought they were pretty neat, so they had some made for their temple gardens. And now you see them in Japan. They rarely light them anymore. They're more of a garden feature, like a natural rock type of a thing in the garden instead. And so I've got them scattered through the gardens here, and in a proper Japanese garden, you should be able to see one at any place that you are in the garden. You should be able to see a lantern at the same time on it.
But not too many of them.
No, not overdone on it. And of course, they do become a natural feature of the garden. And again, the Japanese like old wood. And if you look at the old railroad ties along the pathway here on it, they will let wood almost rot part ways and then make a bridge out of it. The Chinese like bright red painted things, a lot of gold and gilded and fancy things, but the Japanese like the natural features of the wood, and that's why these timbers are kind of old looking like this on it. But anyway, to have this little pebble garden and to see the pebbles when they're wet and shiny, and when they rain on them, to see little bits of snow on them, the evergreens with bits of snow on them. So there's always an interest in them. Animals love them. You see some little chipmunks running around here and so on, and it's just a perfect natural type of a thing. And again, they couldn't leave. They didn't have much in the way of transportation, so this was their little world. To have sometimes just a matter of a 10 by 8 foot little square in the back of their house, and one little twisted pine tree in it, maybe a sedge or two on it, and that way they could enjoy a little bit of outdoors at the same time. So I think they went through the same things we went through for a period of time. They took the single flower and doubled it and made a great big bowl of Kleenex out of it. And went back to the single flower again. They went through the lollipop trees, which we're going through now, where you have a great big rounded top tree, or if the tree isn't perfect, why you consider it not a perfect tree. They went back to nature with a bent tree and
that mugo pine by the lantern.
Twisted tree like this to make it look like part of nature instead of
Makes
doing
you
that.
think of being in the mountains, kind of.
Yeah, to look like the mountain trees on it, and again, if you work on the trees and contort them, that's called niwaki. If you grow a small tree in a dish or a pot, that's called bonsai, and everybody says bonsai, but it's really bonsai on it.
Yeah.
And so that's also part of the keeping it up. A small garden like this in Japan, this is not being kept up just exactly perfect right now, but they do yet have professional gardeners come in to take care of their little tiny garden. And sometimes a little garden only 10 by 15 feet will cost $2,000 or $3,000 to have everything just perfect. They will have the pine needles. They don't like to have a real thick pine head on it, and the people will actually pick out certain needles, even in their one little pine tree, to have it a little bit thin and sparse. They want to see the structure of the tree, and so they do that. But to have somebody come in and groom your garden once a year for $2,000 or $3,000, that's quite an expense at the same time, and yet they do it.
But it's an important place to them.
Yes, it is, right, absolutely. So anyway, that's a little bit of the Pebble Garden here, and then of course other Japanese aspects in the other parts of the garden there. There's, you grow moss. You can see some of the moss growing along the timber trail there right now on it. And you can also see ashes that I put down back over there. I found that you can grow ashes very well, or moss very well on ashes. And if it had rained now, that moss would be just a brilliant green, as well as some of the other moss here too at the same time. But again, it's a delight to have a small bit of Japan type of a gardening here by having these individual pebbles like this, and having a little bit of the natural look in your backyard.
I think it's fantastic, Ren.
So I think we should say that's
Call it a wrap?
Yeah.
All right.